Cardenas. I am the Senior Director of IT for a national credentialing organization. Also a co-founder of Association Latinos, and happy to be on this panel to talk about AI tools. Celia?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Celia Chomón Zamora, and I am the Director of Professional Learning and Certification at ACTFL, which is a nonprofit organization that looks to empower and support language educators and language learning across the world. And I'm very excited to be here to talk to you about AI as well, along with Carlos.
Want to get that screen shared? Go ahead and get that going. Give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen.
Not yet. No, they're not.
Okay, all right. So our AI journey for today, we already went through the introductions. Our plan is to go through some demonstrations. We'll talk a little bit about what the buzz is for all of generative AI tools. An introduction, how you can get started, how you can experiment. With them, what's in it for me, right? We asked you to come here. There's obviously some benefit and value to you. We'll talk about that as well, along with some considerations in terms of being careful. We'll talk about some resources and takeaways, and we're going to give ourselves a little bit of room at the end to allow for some questions, and we know you'll definitely have some. Celia, did I miss anything?
No, definitely talking about as with anything, of course, ChatGPT and artificial intelligence is something that is changing day by day. And as much as we're all very excited to jump on this bandwagon with you, we are, of course, cognizant that we need to tread carefully and think of all of the ethical and privacy issues involved. So we will get into that as well.
So welcome to the world of AI, right? So what is this whole AI that we're hearing about, and it's everywhere? It just kind of exploded. I'll talk a little bit about this in terms of how I think about it and the little that I know. I'm by no means an expert in this, but I have dabbled and experimented with it, so I can share my story and usage of the tool. So it is essentially a growing technology field. Think of it as a predictor tool, and it uses large data sets, typically called large language models, and it's gotten really good at predicting the next word in a sequence. And even more advanced than that, it's gotten really good at processing natural language and anticipating not just the next word, but sentences, paragraphs, stories, so on and so forth. And that's just one version of it. There are text versions, prompts where you can feed it. There are also others where you can feed it and have it generate an image. The concept is the same, right? You have a prompt, you feed it something, a question, and it generates an output. Why is that important to associations? Why is that important to us? It is relatively transforming pretty much every sector that you can think about. Think of it as an enhancer, a complementer into your current superpowers. Think of writer's block, creative block. ChatGPT can help you along with a couple of other things. So I won't dwell on the specifics for now. I'll also say that these AI tools are exploding because of the resources that are available, right? And so I don't have to get a server and install it on my server. I can spin up, Amazon Web Service server or Microsoft Azure. I can tap into APIs and I can create those things on myself. So these tools are available to a lot of people. That's why you see an explosion of these tools. And I mentioned that AI tools are poised to change that the way that the world works. Celia, anything else to add to that?
And one of the things that is really impressive about AI and where we feel that it's consistently growing is because the more that we feed into it, the more it learns and the faster it learns. So the more that all of us are using it, the smarter it gets. AI will never be, will always be smarter than what we use it today. And I know it sounds very, sometimes a lot of people think about AI and they think of Terminator and Skynet, but that is really far from what we're talking about. Artificial intelligence has been around for a lot longer than 2023. It has been around for a very long time. And AI lives on your phone, on your smartwatch, on your text message, or even on Microsoft Word for already many, many years. But what we're really seeing now with the boom of it is that when ChatGPT exploded and it really became accessible and tangible for really all of us, especially in associations, now's when we're hearing that be a big buzzword. But it's definitely not something to be scared of. It's something that's really going to leverage. That is something to leverage, and that's going to help you do your job more efficiently, as Carlos said, and better, and create accessibility when maybe there wasn't any.
Thanks, Celia. So let's jump into it. So some of the benefits, and Celia, please feel free to start us off, and I can finish us up at the end of there.
So as I just mentioned, increasing efficiency, really a lot of these mundane tasks, I can definitely speak for myself when I say that after a really long day of writing emails, sometimes I just really need a little kickstart. When I was doing my doctorate, the last thing that I wrote after 2 years of writing my dissertation was my introductory paragraph, because there is just something for me that getting started is really difficult for me. So I was able to write 800 plus pages except for that introductory paragraph. So if I had a tool like AI, like for instance, ChatGPT, that could help me at least just start off that introductory paragraph. And then of course I would mold it and I would fix it as needed, but just that little spark to get me started, or to really help me in getting an email across, or a translation, or a word that I couldn't think of, is something that really will make you more efficient at your work. There's even tools that we'll talk about, for example, right now, that is an AI bot that you put in what you wanted to do on Excel, and it will give you the formulas for you, instead of you going on YouTube and scouring through dozens of YouTube videos just to be able to find that one formula that you need. So it really is a great tool to leverage for efficiency. Carlos?
Yeah, so I'll say, data analysis, there's some caveats here. I've used it on my own personal data sets, dummy data. We'll talk a little bit about intellectual property. You're not supposed to be feeding ChatGPT and these other AI tools company secrets. So if you're doing that, stop doing that. We'll talk a little bit about conversations that you should be having at your organization. But essentially, you can take these large, complex data sets and you can ask an AI tool to look for patterns. You look for particular trends that maybe a human might not see. And it could summarize data. It can do it pretty easily. I know there are some enhancements that are forthcoming for larger data sets. I think even integration with Wolfram Alpha, that might be able to help with some computation as well. But it just has another thing, as Celia mentioned, I'm the same way when I go through my creative process. I don't know what the finished product is going to look like. And so to some extent, it might seem like a brain dump. And then you're like, okay, let me try to put some of these together. An AI tool can look at some of these and it can say, you're really trying to say this. You might feed it a couple paragraphs, just getting started. And then you might say, what is the particular tone? What am I trying to relay? What is the message that you're getting from this particular text here? And it might give you some examples. Or if you hit that writer's block, as in Celia's example, writing that introductory paragraph, you can say, based on these 4 paragraphs that I fed you, can you give me an idea of what an introductory paragraph might look like? And that might be enough to get, your brain going and give you some ideas to take that suggestion and then make it your own. So again, we can go all over the place with these particular examples, but these are just to give an example, a teaser into what's possible, what we've done with this tool.
And really the creativity aspect of it, which was no, you can go ahead, Carlos, it's fine. But the creativity aspect really is a way for you to access and unlock a lot of tools that will be really great for association professionals. For example, this entire slide deck was created on beautiful.ai, which is a really wonderful website that uses artificial intelligence. I gave it the title of our talk. I gave it the outline and some bullet points, and it created all of the slides for me. And then I was able to go in there, and Carlos was able to go in there and edit, replace some pictures, replace some wording. But for the most part, the entire slide deck was created for us, and all we needed to do was just go in there and edit. So if I only have a few minutes to spare before a board meeting that all of a sudden I got called into creating a slide deck on my report, I can feed it that information. As of course, Carlos said, being cognizant of the fact that we are not feeding it private information and that we are not feeding it, company secrets, but just being very vague in general or just overall things, we can have that taken off of our plate. Whereas maybe this PowerPoint might have taken me an hour or so of my time to do. At least the structure and the skeleton of it was created with animations, a beautiful color scheme. I was able to tell it that I wanted a more modern look with these colors and these kinds of pictures. So again, it really is a wonderful tool for association professionals.
And I will say, if you are Google users and are Microsoft users, this very same thing in terms of generating PowerPoints are features that are going to be coming to both of those platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll touch on it, but again, you cannot escape it. It's coming. And so you have to try to maximize it and learn it to be able to leverage the tool for your benefit.
So what we'll be doing now is just giving you a nice little demo of what you can do, for example, with ChatGPT, which is the current big buzzword right now, as well as talking to you about some current AI tools that we are using in this presentation or have used to create this presentation. And then after that, and after we go through a few demos, we'll talk about some more of the ethical issues and things to just be aware of when you're using ChatGPT, as well as some other resources and tools that you can just get your feet wet. And that's really how Carlos and I got to this position. I am by no means a technology expert, but I always do try to stay ahead of the trends or start trying to just be in it. And the first day that ChatGPT came out and Google Bard and all of these great tools, I was in there just playing around with it and just seeing what I can create, watching tutorials on TikTok, watching tutorials on YouTube, and just even joining Facebook groups that kind of show you what prompts you can get out of it. And I think that's one of the really most important, crucial features of this. I work again in the language education field. So a lot of the conversations that have been happening in my association is, will this take over language teachers' jobs? Because you can even utilize ChatGPT as a language learning partner. You can use it to help you translate documents. You can help it to feed it information, and then it acts as an actual oral conversation partner. But the only way that you can do that is if you know what information you are feeding it. You still need to have the critical thinking and the language knowledge and the pragmatics and the cultural components to be able to A, analyze what it's telling you to ensure that it's correct and that it's not false. And B, you also still need to have the power to give it these prompts. So we're not necessarily scared of it taking jobs away in the near future, because there still needs to be somebody that is teaching them how to put these prompts in. So that's what we'll talk about next.
Thank you. So part of interacting with these AI tools is the prompt. So you'll hear that repeatedly, and it's essentially asking the AI tool the right questions. And you should be very familiar with this if you're a Google user. So if you're searching for something and you don't use the right terminology, the right language, then your search result is going to suffer because of that. So I think the same applies for these AI tools. The more descriptive you can get, the more specific and the more clear you are with what you're asking, the better result that you're going to get. So I've got an example here, and I'll walk through one with ChatGPT, but I like to write, I like to tinker with things. And so what I like to do is, if I've written something, I have a rough draft, I may paste it into ChatGPT, and then I say, pretend you're a senior editor-in-chief, play the role. You'll hear that a lot with ChatGPT. And so you're basically prompting this AI tool to act as a particular subject matter expert. So I say, playing the role of a senior editor-in-chief, take a look at what I've written so far and give me a grade, give me your assessment. Maybe I say use a 10-point scale in terms of how I'm doing. Also tell me what I'm missing from my blog or article and give me some suggestions. And so it's a way to have a conversation back and forth to say, oh, I'm talking about this, but I didn't give enough detail. Let me give more detail there. So and so on and so forth, right? You can go back and forth that way, and it's worked really well for me. I'm not saying I have the tool right for me, but I have it check my work. Another one, we are a credentialing organization, and so we've got people who need to do something by a certain date. And so if you think about a 12-month calendar, and let's say today we're 6 months away from doing something, and then their credential expires. So, thinking of using AI tool to create an email with a different tone based on how their proximity to their expiration date is something that you might be able to use as well. In this particular example, I say send an email on somebody's birth date. And so, maybe in their 20s or maybe in their 30s, their language is a little bit different, right? So I say, take that into account in your response. So I can take all of those and I can customize birthday messages, right? For all of my certificates or my members. In the other example, based on their proximity to their credential expiring, 3 months out, I may say, hey, by the way, you've got something to do in 3 months. A month out, I may say, you've got 30 days to do something. 2 weeks out, I may even get more critical and say, you've got to do something or you're at risk of your credential expiring. So again, these AI tools based on a particular piece of information can change its tone. You can also even ask it to acting as a psychologist or a linguist to suggest appropriate words. And Celia can talk a little bit more about that, but I've used these simple descriptions, and I've used these more contextualized prompts, and you really do get more fruitful information the more descriptive you are. Celia, did you want to jump into an example?
So definitely, in terms of like the linguist part, so you can use it, especially if you're trying to make your messaging a little bit more accessible. So for example, if you know that you need to send a message out and your particular members have a lower proficiency of English or a higher proficiency of English, you're able to switch it up to say, can you please reword this sentence with a novice mid-level English? And just really make it a little bit more basic. Or of course, if you're talking to some academic people that don't necessarily want to see a lower level of English, you can then really reword your phrasing using that, or you can make it more geared towards specific professions, as Carlos was saying.
So I'm going to go into an example, and Celia and I were talking about this. So we just got back from a long extended weekend, Memorial Day. So let's just say it's Thursday or it's Friday, I'm about to cut my staff loose. So I may say, can you write me an email letting my staff know they are free to leave the office early in recognition of Memorial Day. So here's just an example. I'm using ChatGPT version 4. This is the paid model, but I'm going to hit enter and let's see what happens here. So it's putting a subject and it's based on my question. Special notice, early departure, dear team. I can copy this and I can tailor it however I'd like afterwards, but let's go ahead and let this finish. So I may say, hey, this is 4 paragraphs. This is an email, it's way too long. I may say, can you shorten this into 2, I don't know, succinct paragraphs? So it'll take that exact same language, and what we'll see is the consolidation of that. And I'm just going to do one more variation to this before we move on, just to underscore Celia's example. So maybe some of my staff they only speak Spanish, right? And so maybe I want to translate this email into Spanish. And so I'll say, can you help me translate? Many versions of Spanish, right? So you can say Mexican Spanish, Cuban Spanish, from Spain, and so on and so forth. So again, the more specific you are, I think the better results, but I'm just going to say Spanish just to keep it simple. So the subject, right, stayed the same in English, but the actual subject was translated into Spanish. Some words you may see as team are translated to equipo, but that might be different depending on the region you're from. So again, this is a conversation. Feel free to say, well, where I'm from, we don't use that word. And it might say, you know what, I'm going to use, where are you from? So this is a conversation. This is just an example of how you might use it to generate an email to let your staff know they can leave early in observance of Memorial Day. One more thing, if I can. So Celia just took her CAE exam, right? So here's an example. Can you help me create a study, I'll say plan, for the ASAE I don't want to assume that it knows abbreviations. I mean, I could, but I'm going to spell it out just to make sure it knows exactly what I'm talking about. So it'll go through that and it'll say, you know, step 1, step 2, step 3. You might even take that and say, can you create a weekly study plan for me? Can you create a study plan for me based on content domains that are weighted heaviest, right? So you can ask it all of those conversations, and slowly but surely you're kind of filtering or funneling that response to what you're trying to get to. So again, it's a conversation. It's an interaction between me and this AI tool. I'm going to pass it back to you, Celia.
And I think before we move forward, I think that one of the tools that you can use look at right now is Otter AI. So I did put the chat or the link in the chat, Carlos, if you want to click on it. This is a really great, easy tool that you could already take advantage for your association. So I am the staff liaison for my professional learning committee at ACTFL. And also I am the chair for the events and relationship building committee in Association Latinos. And one of the things that's really difficult is to always take notes. Because when you're taking notes, it's really difficult to be able to take good notes as well as participate and be engaged, and sometimes you might miss things. So Otter.ai is a really wonderful tool that, Carlos, were you able to click on it?
I don't see the, oh, here it is.
Oh, Ben just put it in again. So what this really wonderful AI tool does is that it syncs to your calendar, and then it invites itself to your meeting. So of course you can tell it which meeting. You can say, I will invite you to the meetings that I would like for you to go to, or I want you to go to all of my meetings. But because of course there are times that sensitive information is discussed in certain meetings, I invite it to the meetings. And the great thing is that if you scroll up, Carlos, not only is it taking audio notes of everything that I do right now, but once the meeting is over, what it'll do is it will summarize all of the key points, and then it'll send an email to all of the participants with the timestamps, the main items discussed. If we talk about action items or next steps, you can assign it next steps. You can highlight certain things, and then people can go in there during the meeting and comment on certain things. And it'll even separate it by speaker. So speaker 1, you can call speaker 1 Carlos, speaker 2 Celia, and then you can click on when Celia says certain things and search for it. And then if you click on it, you can hear the audio that was said during that time. So there's a really wonderful tool to be able to synthesize information, take great notes, keep that in your file, and also for accessibility. There are plenty of times that we cannot necessarily have really good closed captioning for certain things or for meetings. So it's a really good way for anyone who needs a little bit of additional help, or especially for our members that are second language learners of English or of other languages, you could already have that information here in real time. And it'll also take screenshots of what was shown when that audio appeared. So if it was a slide deck or if it was a certain document, it'll show those screenshots as well. So there's another really great tool to leverage in associations. Back to you, Carlos.
Thank you. Yeah, I use this as well. What I'm trying to do now is take that summarization and turn it into a special formatting. So I might say, we just had a board meeting. Can you take this and format it in board meeting minutes? Here's the subject, here's the date of the meeting, here's the time. So that's what I'm trying to do next. So take something that made my life easier already and make it a little bit more easier for the next thing that I might have to do. One thing that I did not mention here, but I think it's important to recognize that whatever you are asking these AI tools, whatever prompt you are using, the old adage is trust but verify.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular case, evidence suggests that you need to verify it before you trust it. In the AI tool world, generative AI, there's a thing called hallucinations. And so I'll give you an example. We had a webinar, CEOs and CIO conversation, and I asked a tool to summarize some text, call it. And it mistakenly told me one of my speakers was the late John Graham, so former CEO of ASAE. He passed a couple of years ago, but the tool told me that he was one of the speakers, actually somebody else who wasn't even a speaker. So I had to tell the tool, hey, this person was not a speaker, it was actually this person. So don't just feed it information and trust the output. You are responsible for that. Depending on what you're doing with it, if you are using it at your own organization, you are ultimately responsible for that output and checking it and validating it. So you have to do your due diligence. You have to triangulate the data to make sure it's accurate, because sometimes currently, even though it's learning, it tends to make stuff up. And that is what's referred to as hallucinating.
And just to reiterate that, I did ask it to help me come up with some leadership coaching philosophies, just kind of testing it out. And then I asked for ChatGPT to show me its sources. And it did give me some beautiful, it gave me, I believe it was 4 or 5 beautiful APA citations with the publisher and everything. So of course, being the good researcher that I am, I put those into Google Scholar to find, just to verify that it was the correct year. And none of those 4 resources existed. They were not real publications. None of them existed. And then I asked ChatGPT, please, these are false resources. Please provide me the real resources that you use, because it was giving me quotes and page numbers and it could not provide them. And I tried searching by the authors, it just did not exist. So I believe that now the current version of ChatGPT will not give you sources. It'll actually say that as an AI tool, it's not allowed to give you sources. So again, it's learning, but it's just, again, as Carlos said, just be very wary and just assume that it is probably lying to you first, because as we said, it grows smarter by the day because of what we feed it. But it's really important to note that sometimes what it's being fed is not accurate. And we will get into that in a little bit. But with the feeding does come into the fact that a lot of the information that we are getting from ChatGPT is rooted in non-DEI lenses, in possibly white supremacist lenses and non-equitable lenses. So we definitely need to be cognizant of that as we are getting information and getting our staff to use that information as well.
Thank you, Celia. That was great. The other use case is, again, I asked the question at the beginning, who is using this at their, association or organization? And again, people like to talk in the theoretical, right? You can do so many different things with AI and maybe just focus on the goods. We know that there's hallucinations, right? If you're thinking about applying it to your business, I think the first place you need to start to think about is, well, what business challenges or opportunities am I facing now? And can an AI tool help me solve that problem more quickly? You can think about it as a force multiplier. to some extent. But think about those business cases and how you might be able to apply. Again, I think you need to start with having a conversation. In my own organization, I can walk around the office and I might see a few people with ChatGPT on their screens. Definitely my developer team, sometimes they encounter roadblocks and ChatGPT gives them the inspiration to get over that roadblock. But do you allow your staff to continue in the Wild West experimenting with these AI tools and not providing any sort of guidelines or governance? I don't think so. I think it would be a mistake to do that. So again, I think you need to start talking at your own organizations to say the tools here, how do we learn about this a little bit more? Is there a training program that our staff can subscribe to? And how might they use it to enhance their particular role at the organization? Obviously, you need to talk about intellectual property, and there needs to be some recourse, right? Anybody can make a mistake, but if you continually make that and you're feeding it and you're adding to the body of AI knowledge, intellectual property, I think that's a big mistake. So again, the more you talk about it, the more policies and procedures are crafted and people know what they should be doing and what they should not be doing. So I have some examples in terms of how you might be able to use it. You might take your data set, you might say, divide my 20 to 30-year-olds as this particular demographic. So data segmentation, data personalization, that is the direction that, AMSs are heading in to personalize that message as they come into your systems. I mentioned the creativity, I mentioned the campaigns, sending out different messages to different groups and seeing what the response is. Membership renewal. I also am part of the ASAE Technology Advisory Council, and something that we'll be looking at with AI tools is how can we predict people who are not likely to renew? What are some data points that can help us predict that? And what can we do with an AI tool to help counter that? So maybe an early message that you send them, or maybe you look at people who renew early and say, all of them do this, this, and this. I've got to get this person to renew to do this last thing, and then the higher chances that they're going to renew. So again, you can be creative. I think imagination is probably the limit here. For my team, in terms of technology, I like to say that we have a lot of different reports that we create, sometimes with not optimized SQL queries. And so I may just take a general SQL query, no intellectual property, no personal identifiable data, just queries. And I might say, can you take this and can you help me enhance it? If I can shave off seconds from a query, right? If I run a report and it takes 10 seconds, that's probably 7 seconds too long. If I can shave some seconds off of that, then I think the experience for our team and for the end users who are consuming that report, they'll be a lot happier. So again, these are just some basic examples. One thing I think is really interesting, if you think about a website and you think about Zendesk, for example, they all have these chatbots. And so you ask it a question and it gives you a response. So can you imagine an AI tool that can scour your entire website just like a ChatGPT does? So can you train your own data with ChatGPT tools that is not going to be added into the AI body of knowledge, but can learn your data, can learn the nuances, and can give your website visitors a pretty cool response. So those are some things that are actively being discussed. We all have files and documents, file servers, right? Can AI tools help us organize that, maintain it, look at what files are not being used, look at the different versions, look at creating taxonomies? Again, these are just things that we all probably struggle with. And can we apply these AI tools to help us solve business problems? Celia, anything to add on this?
No, I think you really got it well. But I mean, in terms of the creativity, I recently had to go to a conference and I was just one of those really long days that I could not come up with a title. So I was able to give it the main bullet points, the summary, and I asked for it to give me a funny, engaging title for this demographic and this audience. And it was able to provide me some really, really good ones. And then, of course, again, I was able to edit it, ask it to make it funnier, to make it more engaging, to emphasize this part of the title. And it was able to really kind of get those creative juices flowing as good as probably another brainstorm session would.
And I did mention that some of these tools, if you're a Microsoft user, they're coming to Microsoft 365. So, in terms of looking at your data, think of Excel, think of a prompt. Hey, analyze this particular data set, row column A through Z, or this entire data set. Those types of capabilities are coming. So you'll get a chance to experiment with it. I mentioned you shouldn't be looking too far, right, to look for those business opportunities. You should know what they are right now. You should be talking amongst your organization with different departments to talk about what problems they're trying to solve, and maybe you have some common opportunities. Use AI tools to enhance your creativity, productivity, obviously your value, your prosperity. Not in place of, but to complement. Experiment to learn how best to leverage. Again, you can think of marketing, membership, finance, and IT. Everybody has their own business cases. Talk about what those opportunities are. And sometimes a conversation can get you the answer that you're looking for, or get you going in a direction where you might be able to get yourself the answer. I think the important thing is to talk about them, which is the second bullet point here. So again, encourage your organizations to start having these conversations, even at the C-suite level, at a minimum, I think. So what are these tools? And you probably have some chief executive officers, some board members who already know what these tools are, and they might consider themselves subject matter experts. But the point is, have these conversations to see how the business can leverage these tools. Not just, hey, let's just go use them just to use them and experiment, but how can we leverage these to help our business?
And definitely using, I'm sorry, but definitely using a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, not just for your staff, but also for your members as well, so that you can then engage in conversations with your members about how this might be an opportunity, but also a threat if not used correctly, or do you need to really reevaluate what your membership is going to be like with these AI tools that continue to really evolve every single day.
If you think about volunteer committees, if you think about just committees in general, where there's an application process, where there's an essay questions that have to be written. I mean, DELPers, we probably have some DELPers in the audience. There's essay questions, right? So not only can you help create some of those or write some of those essay questions, but you can also try to use it to detect if an AI tool was used to write that particular essay. So again, on both sides, as the creator and the person that's verifying, you've got to be aware of these tools and how to use them. Not saying they're going to give you the right answer and detect it 100% of the time. I think you should be experimenting with some of these tools.
So definitely, I'm sorry, Carlos, go ahead.
No, go ahead. This is your slide.
So definitely at this point, we are going to get into the ethical considerations of AI, because even though it is a wonderful tool that when leveraged correctly can really impact and make our work a lot more efficient, there are some precautions that we need to take, not just for ourselves, but for the staff and our organizations and our members that are using it, to make sure that all of the work that we have done in terms of DEI and, our representations and so forth are not being, taken 40 steps back, because that is something that could happen if we're not careful with a lot of these considerations. So for example, there is a conference that's a big technology conference in the education world called ISTE, and they just came up with one of their keynote speakers is going to be an AI. It's her name is Clara, and it is an Afro-Latina AI bot. that was fed information and that is going to present the keynote. However, when you look at the fact that we have been working in the Afro-Latina community so diligently, such a long time to get Afro-Latino representation anywhere, and that now that Afro-Latino representation is going to come in the form of an AI is just really kind of a slap to the face for all of the advocacy work and all of the outreach work that we've done. So really, we have to just be very careful that AI doesn't necessarily mean representation, because of course, then the real question is, well, who was feeding this Afro-Latina AI the materials? Was it was it somebody that wasn't even in the Afro-Latina community? And what part of the Afro-Latina community? So we have to just be really careful of that representation. Next slide, please. And of course, as Carla has already alluded to, data privacy is a big one. You have to, when I ask ChatGPT and play around with it to create emails for me or so forth, I always make sure that I put a large nonprofit organization that works with language educators or something just very vague, and that I can fill in the blanks based on my knowledge of my organization. But I never put in my organization's name. I never put in any information about my members. I never put in basically nothing that will ID me as the user and my organization as the user. And that definitely goes with data security as well. And accuracy. Carlos made a really interesting point about AI helping you be able to detect other AI. I did include a link in one of the slides where a professor at in a Texas university actually did put in all of his students' final essays into ChatGPT for it to detect which ones were written by ChatGPT, and it said that all of them were. And so then he failed all of his students, but in fact, only one of those students actually did use ChatGPT, and it erroneously categorized all of them as having cheated, because of course, again, it really is biased towards a certain section of students who have either a lower vocabulary of English or certain grammatical structures based on what the data that it's fed. So again, we just have to be very careful about these biases that ChatGPT already comes with. Next slide, please. When we
just want to touch on that real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
The other side, so we talked about volunteer members, we talked about applications, we talked about a professor, creating his student papers. It's very tempting to take essay questions, right, and feed them into ChatGPT that are not your own and ask it for help. So what about the other side of that, right? So, we're saying don't share company secrets, but I think sometimes it's easy for the person who's evaluating. Think about a selection committee. Think about taking those particular adult essay questions and think about saying, help me grade these. How are they? So now you're taking somebody's essay questions, which are meant to be private, you're putting it in the public domain and you're saying, can you rate this? The same example I gave earlier, that stuff that I write, you could use it, you could use it for the essays that are submitted. Is that ethical to do, to share somebody's information and to put it in that public body of knowledge? Not 100% sure, but at some point, there's going to be a saturation of these, right? And you're not going to be able to tell who's submitting what, knowing that there are false positives that are happening. AI, I think in general, text is going to be created, and you're not going to be able to tell the difference for the text part of it. So sorry to derail your conversation there.
No.
Back to you.
No, but that's definitely part of ethics. So when we talk about ethics, it's interesting because, as Carlos has already mentioned, the AI does lie, quote unquote, right? So if we go to the next slide, the lies that it produces will vary by language, because of course, depending on what it is being fed in certain languages, it will give you a very different version of the story. So I was able to put into ChatGPT, who is Kim Jong-un? And in Korean, it said, as a politician from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, has been the top leader of the country since 2011, serves as the first secretary of the Workers' Party, holding significant political power, the grandson of Kim Il-sung. Under his leadership, the DPRK has garnered international attention. When I asked the same question in English, it said it's a political figure who served as a supreme leader of North Korea until his passing. He was succeeded by his father and his grandfather, who were also former leaders. They held various titles, including chairman of the Workers' Party. He was known for his authoritarian rule and the pursuit of nuclear weapons. So notice how in one of them, talk about being supreme leader and authoritarian and nuclear weapons was definitely not part of that conversation, but in the English version it was, because again, that information being fed came from two very different perspectives. And correct, being alive versus dead. And of course, in China, where ChatGPT is extremely limited, you are going to get very different answers in Chinese. And of course, you're probably going to get a Chinese perspective of Chinese speakers not living in China, because again, in China, it is not allowed. So you're going to get very different perspectives of Chinese answers, depending on the country where those Chinese answers are coming in from. Apart from that, one of the things that I look at a lot in my particular role is language variety. In my field, we have done a lot of work to try to ensure that all varieties of a language are accepted. There is no right or wrong version of Spanish, as long as you can communicate. So if you go to the next slide, Carlos, you'll see that I was kind of playing with it. I asked it to give have a written discussion with me in Spanish and give me feedback. And so then I use the word, I know that this is Association Latinos, doesn't necessarily mean you speak Spanish, so I'm going to translate. But one of the questions I asked it was, at what time are we going to have lunch? But I used the word lonchear, which is a word that is very much used in communities where English and Spanish are basically intertwined. So think of Mexican-American Spanish, Spanglish in Miami or in California or New York. Lonchar is an acceptable word. And then it said the correct word is almorzar, which is to have lunch, no lonchear. And then I'm like, okay, let me move forward. Fine, I'll meet you in the parqueo. Parqueo is again one of those words that is combining English and Spanish, which again, if you communicate to most people that speak Spanish, they will understand that parqueo means the parking lot. And then it gave me feedback saying, nope, that is not the correct form of saying it. So again, if we're really trying to do all of this DEI work and empowering our second and third generation Hispanic, children and generations and professionals to speak their language, to be empowered to use their language. And then now comes this AI and saying, no, that's not right. You're dumb. Why are you saying that? It's kind of like completely taking away all of this work that we've done to finally get them to the point where they are empowered to use their language. And one of the most famous quotes in the linguistic community is, if you really want to insult someone, you insult their language. And telling somebody that the way that they speak Spanish is incorrect and giving them this feedback, and there is no teacher to tell them, no, your variety is perfectly fine, could do some damage, especially culturally or emotionally, to a young professional who already feels a little bit not as confident in their Spanish. Let's skip the next slide, just because I know that we're running short on time, but I did want to make one more point. We also need to think about when it comes to DEI and representation and colonization of languages, because for example, in New Zealand, a lot of Indigenous groups are fearing a recolonization of their language, because again, a lot of their languages are being fed into AI without their explicit permission. And for them, their language is one of the last kind of natural resources that they have, and that it's being used and mined without their permission, and then they're being told that their language is not appropriate, that it has to be done the way that AI does it, is really, really problematic. And we have to really be cognizant of the fact that, again, there are a lot of biases, a lot of colonization and white supremacy in a lot of these even misogyny, machista kind of attitudes. So as we are getting this information from AI, we need to, again, as Carlos said, just be really cognizant of the fact that you have to double, triple, quadruple check what you are getting from the AI, because again, it's depending who is feeding it to them. And what you're getting out might be something that is reaped in things that are not in that anti-racism, decolonization perspective and lens. One more thing that I wanted to talk about, because I am here to basically be the party pooper of AI in the next slide, is that there are a lot of biases that we have been really diligent in trying to work against, but they are showing up again in AI. Again, there's a lot of reported biases against L2 speakers of English, BIPOC communities, and other underserved communities. I put the link here for the Texas A&M Commerce issue with the professor. And again, there's like a lot of different stats that say that if resumes are ran through AI tools, I think it was something crazy like 43% will completely dismiss resumes of women or of BIPOC communities, especially when it comes to their names or how their names are spelled, ageism. So we just have to be really, really careful when we are using these AI tools, that they have to be used responsibly and ethically, that we cannot just blindly go in there and trust them. We have to really put in all of the work that we have done ethically and in our DEI lens and use it to leverage it, but not just solely trust it.
I think it's interesting when you talk about sovereignty of data, and I think if let's just say other countries take this stance, then you're going to have sovereign data sources, single sources of truth, and how does that get added to large language models? I think there's a lot of reconciling and reckoning that we're going to have to be doing in the next, 6 to 12 months, and probably longer than that. There's things that we haven't really figured out quite yet. I think it's clear if these AI tools are feeding you things that are not correct, and we're asking you to double, triple, quadruple check. I could foresee filters being added to these, maybe not necessarily at the input, but at the output. So check for biases before it actually generates that response on your screen. Before it actually prints, it goes through some sort of process to filter. Maybe it triangulates and says, I've got 3 different separate independent pieces of data, and I can maybe a high probability that is likely to be true. So, where we're at right now might not be the same place where we're at in 6 months, but that should not stop you from going and exploring and experimenting with these tools. You'd be putting yourself at a disadvantage if you do not. I'm going to finish us up. I know we're almost short on time. We're going to give ourselves 5 minutes for some Q&A. But to underscore a bias, this is Midjourney. It's an image generation tool. So I asked it to create an image of a Latino. The first one on the right side is the one that was created first. Create an image of a Latino in a power suit surrounded by his ancestors. I may have even said in a cityscape, right? So you see some bright colors. This one seemed to be, I had the most success with. I had some variations with this, and I had to be specific in terms of the ancestors. When I tried to go and say, give me the Latina version of this, I had a hard time. So you see the middle image here. When I said surrounded by her ancestors, I think the first one, women were not included in that. So it just had a bunch of men in the background, maybe 1 or 2 women in the background. You can see people with suits in the background, right? And so that's not really an ancestor. And then you've got some weird depictions in the back, all the way in the back in that center image. The one that I thought was very closely related to what I was looking for, although it's a little dark, is the image on the left side. So even though the ancestors look kind of alienish, I think it did the best job of depicting those ancestors. So language is important. You've got to be specific. Those biases come from the data sets, right? And biases have been with us. They're in books, right? So as a society, as a country, we've got to think about how do we deal with these biases? Is it because it's lacking data to compensate and it's only giving you maybe falsehoods? or things that are generally not written. To go through one more, same type of thing, right? Depending on the language, show me an immigrant family, or being separated from their immigrant family as they go to another country. Showing, go ahead, Alex, I think you have a question. You have a question? All right, I'm going to keep moving. So you see 3 different variations here. Again, language is specific. On some of them, you may see dark tones, on some of them more brighter. We're going to be sharing an AI resource guide to give you kind of an introduction to some tools that you should be playing with and experimenting with. They're free. And then we have some intermediate tools that you can also play around with. Just because it's a new AI tool doesn't mean it's good. Probably for every new 100 tools that are born, maybe 90 are not good, 95. So do your due diligence as you're experimenting with these, but I promise you, you're going to have fun while doing it, and they're going to make your lives easier. They're going to complement what you're doing now already. Questions?
Hi, so this is Josie. We had a couple of questions from Alex earlier. It sounds like his mic's having some problems, so I'll relay those. The second one that he asked was, if 2 different people type in the exact same question into ChatGPT, will they get different answers or the same answer? And why would they get a different answer if it's different?
I can take that one. You're probably going to get different answers. It is, and it's because the algorithm is not the same on each prompt. So I may ask it a question, I may get some variation in terms of the response. I don't expect it to be substantially different. I'll say it also depends on the length of the question, right? Shorter questions probably tend to get more accurate responses. Whereas if you say, I've got a paragraph long question and give me this detail, and this detail, that's probably where some hallucinations happen. Celia, what's your experience with that?
I would say that it also depends when you ask it, because you can ask the exact same question, but if it's 5 minutes apart, it might have already learned something different, or might have gathered information from elsewhere within those 5 minutes. So I don't think, as you said, it will be fundamentally different, but it might just be slightly different.
And here's the thing, though, we need these tools to be precise, the same every time if we're going to turn those algorithms onto our own data. If I ask it, what is a nurse anesthetist, and it gives me a different answer every time, then it's useless to me. So you've got to make sure that we have that same response. And I think that's where you're going with that question.
Yeah. The other question that Alex had is, it's curious about the anonymity, where you don't type in your company's name, and how that is suggested to address ethics. But what do you guys think about staff members using it to complete their work, but not divulging any AI origin?
I think there are ethical implications. I'll say it depends on the audience, who is going to be receiving that work. If it is members, you need to be talking about that and saying, should we disclose it? I definitely don't want to mislead members. If they're using it without, any supervisor's knowledge, and they're just in general using it to complement their work, I think that might be okay. Where you're entering personal, identifiable information, that is where the line gets drawn. And so I can't say, here's a list of all my members. Can you help me create an email campaign for each and every one of them based on their data attributes? I mean, you're just giving away company secrets there. Celia, what's your take on that?
And I think it just goes back to even when Wikipedia first came out. And again, I come from a very different field. I come from the education space, where when Wikipedia first came out, every single instructor thought that Wikipedia was going to be the end all for plagiarism, that all students were going to just be copying and pasting from Wikipedia and not knowing how to do research. And of course, there did need to be a lot of teaching and buy-in and being very explicit about what you can and can't do. So I think I think that the real thing that we need to really focus on is just having these critical conversations with our staff and say, if you want to play around with this tool, if you want to leverage this tool, that's perfectly fine. Here is, let's have a conversation, let's have buy-in as to when they can be used, when they should not be used. Let's talk about ethics. What does ethics mean? So when you are using it for this, can you use it for this? Can you use it for that? And I think just having really clear and set expectations and outcomes and what is ethical and what isn't, I think will go a long way. But I agree with what Mark said in the chat that we just definitely need to be very wary and cognizant of that. And these are things that I have been talking with my staff about, including all of these perspectives and these biases and these lenses that it comes with. And I think that if your staff understands that and understands all of the limitations and the scary parts of AI, then they will definitely be a little bit more wary about just going all in without thinking about what this could entail or what this could mean or what are the consequences of using this without using it ethically. I hope that answered the question.
We are 2 minutes over. Jocelyn, any other questions?
Have not seen any other come through.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
One other thing I'll say is, just to wrap up, visit us on our LinkedIn page, linkedin.com Association Latinos. I'm going to be putting out a poll in the next couple of days to ask what your appetite is for AI workshops. So I know we talked high level on you can use it for marketing and membership. We are interested in learning whether you want to see more specific workshops that can say, I talked about the theoretical application of it. Here's how we actually can apply it. And we might, again, break it up into a series, but be on the lookout for that. We've got some other upcoming events that we're going to be sharing as well. But we appreciate your time and your attention to this important topic that I think we all should be jumping in on right now. Celia, anything else to bring us home?
No, thank you so much. And definitely continue feeding it right information. Thank you so much,
everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone. Buenas noches.